I'm Joe Bianca.
I'm Kelsey Riley.
I'm Bill Finley.
I'm Jonathan Green.
They say the harder the work, the greater the reward. This is our life's work.
Good morning. It is 9:53, Wednesday, December 2nd. This is the TDN Writers Room presented by Keeneland. My name is Joe Bianca. I'm the associate editor of the Thoroughbred Daily News, and all the charities can call off all their causes because we found John a TDN Writers Room shirt.
Because I donated on Giving Tuesday to the Buy John Green a polo shirt fund. Hi, I'm Bill Finley, a correspondent for the Thoroughbred Daily News.
Jonathan Green, general manager of DJ Stable. And if you want evidence of a sire stamping his foals, stay tuned for the Green Group Guest of the Week.
I'm Kelsey Riley, international editor of the TDN, and I'm currently hibernating in Lexington after the first snowfall of the year.
With her parrot.
Yeah.
Who you'll hear. Yeah, so we're stoked to have Kelsey aboard. She's going to rotate in that fourth seat now, along with Alan and Brian. She's obviously got a great Euro perspective, but really just knows racing in and out. So, Kelsey, glad to have you on the show.
Thank you.
The TDN Writers Room is brought to you by Keeneland. Keeneland will conduct a December digital sale in the digital sales ring on Tuesday, December 15th. Entries are open now, and they're open until this Friday, December 4th. So get them in if you want to be part of the digital sale. Visit KeenelandDigital.com for more details. So after just trying to fill a void of nothingness the last couple of weeks, we did have some good racing this past weekend, and we're going to have more this weekend. So we had a pretty good variety of stuff to watch this past weekend at Del Mar, at Churchill, even a little bit overseas, which we'll get to. Aqueduct as well had some nice races. I'll start with Del Mar just because I think that was the most interesting racing. I think Del Mar has done a really good job of creating this little turf festival in the late fall, early winter. They've done a good job keeping these races going from Hollywood, the Matriarch, the Hollywood Derby, all these races I think have been done proud by what Del Mar has done. With this little turf festival. Also, not to be looked over is the fact that they had 0 fatalities at this past meet. So that goes, now we go all the way back to the summer to when the California tracks had a fatality. Santa Anita was clean, Del Mar was clean. So real hats off to everybody who's taken on all these reforms in California to make racing safer. It was a tough time there for a while, but it seems to be working. So kudos to them. But as far as on the racetrack at Del Mar, I thought there were a couple interesting performances. I think the main takeaway is Chad Brown, and Chad Brown kind of owns these Del Mar turf races now. And it was a time there when Chad Brown was really only running in New York and Kentucky and Florida. He didn't really venture out to California that much, but he's taken advantage of turf racing being so, I guess, on vogue. And he's really, kind of taken over this little Del Mar thing. And he's shipping a little bit more out to Santa Anita these days. I wonder if that means he's going to go out to Royal Ascot and start branching out into Europe as well. I mean, that's pretty much the only thing left for him to conquer in terms of turf racing. But he had a bunch of wins this weekend. He had domestic spending in the Hollywood Derby now. Those are 4 interesting horses. They might not be the fastest on the buyer figures, but those are 4 really nice turf 3-year-olds. We're talking about domestic spending, Gufo, Decorated Invader, and Get Smoke. And I think they're all going to have good 4-year-old campaigns. He also had Fluffy Socks in the Jimmy Durante Stakes. He had Viadera, who won the Matriarch, yet another Matriarch win for him. And then he had Orgland, who was a French horse who won the red carpet on Thanksgiving Day. So that was my main takeaway. We can get to the Churchill stuff. We can get to everything else. But I wonder what stood out to you guys just on first glance this weekend.
Joe, I'm going to stay on the same theme, and I think you're absolutely correct. The biggest story of the weekend was Chad Brown. He only entered 5 races at Del Mar, and he won 4 of them, including going first and second in the Matriarch. He also had a horse that ran 6th in there, but 1, 2 in a grade 1. It's kind of interesting to me because you think of Chad Brown in 2020, and I'd say he's had, because he has set the bar so high, kind of a down year. After winning the Eclipse Award 4 straight years, I don't think he's going to win it this year. I think it's going to go to Brad Cox, and I don't think that's not undeserved. He is not in the top spot in earnings. A matter of fact, he's, I believe, 4th right now among all trainers in earnings. But then the guy shows up and he reminds you of just what he can do with these horses and how good he is. And, we take for granted sometimes the success he has had, but, you take a step back and look at that, to go out in a New York outfit, to come into California and to win 4 stakes races over the weekend is just remarkable. And, not that we need to remind him, God, this guy is good.
And there's a very famous quote in history that goes something along the lines of, when Caesar saw the breadth of his domain, he wept, for there are no more worlds to conquer. I think you can say the same thing about Chad Brown here in the States. He doesn't have anywhere else he needs to prove himself. He's won everywhere, every distance. I don't want to say every surface, but definitely on the grass, on the turf. He's won just about every race that's out there. And, you wonder if his importing of horses from Europe to the States obviously has given him an advantage. We'll talk a little bit later on about a couple of other turf races that ran here in the States. And I don't know if bringing those Euros back to Europe is necessarily going to be the winning formula for Chad. He's obviously figured out an advantage of bringing them here and winning all these big races. One of the races in particular I thought was really interesting was the Matriarch, the Grade 1 out in California, that Viadera won, by a head bob. And in my estimation, that was the only time that horse actually was in front the entire race. And even in the post-race gallop out, Viadera knew right where the wire was, or more importantly, Joel Rosario knew right where the wire was and hit it. And that was the only time that it was in front the entire race. So that was interesting. The other thing that I thought was interesting about that race was that there were 8 horses in the race and 5 lengths separated the winner from the last place horse. Talk about an even field, and the way that race played out, it was remarkable that all 8 finishers finished within 5 lengths of each other, going a mile in a very quick 1:33 flat. So it was a great race, and we can go into the races a little bit more detail. But I was really impressed with the competitors of the Matriarch, and also of Domestic Spending winning the Hollywood Derby. Again, that was a great race and a really good ride by Junior Ortiz.
Yeah, and I have to agree, John, with what you said about Viadera and the ride given by Joel Rosario. It was perfectly timed, and I think this is an interesting filly. She's done very little wrong since coming over to the States, having previously been trained in Ireland. And looking back to her races over there, it looked as if she didn't enjoy the softer going, which they had a lot of over there this summer. So good to see her come over here and light up on that good turf course. And something that I think was interesting about that Matriarch result as well is that Viadera is the first Grade 1 stakes winner for Bated Breath, who is a very useful stallion over there for Juddmonte in England. Just a stallion that stands at a slightly lower fee, but just gets tons of winners, graded stakes winners, and this is his first Grade 1 winner, so that was great. And he actually has an excellent record in the U.S. with 6 stakes winners from only 17 runners over here. So that's something interesting. And then to note that the second and third in the Matriarch were by Dan Silly, who is actually Bated Breath's sire. So that was, an interesting result for Juddmonte. But, like you said, Blowout and Juliet Foxtrot, both running excellent races as well. And it wouldn't be a surprise to see them have one of those, Grade 1s with their name on it down the road as well. And then you mentioned Domestic Spending and Chad Brown, how he's gone over there and brought these horses over, and with Mike Ryan working with that team and others as well. And that is Domestic Spending is the result of those trips over to Tattersall's. And he is the third Grade 1 winner for Kingman. And something that actually really struck me when watching the Hollywood Derby was Domestic Spending's turn of foot and his kick at the end of the race. And that is something that's trademark of Kingman. He had that incredible acceleration in the final furlongs of his races, and he seems to have passed that on to his best progeny. So I think Domestic Spending is a horse with great potential. He's going to be a lot of fun to watch going forward.
Yeah, agreed. I think that was the difference in the race. Honestly, I felt like at the 8th pole, it was kind of wide open, and he just had the best kick out of the top 4 horses. And I think that's what got the money for him. Just another follow up on the Matriarch. That 1:33 flat was the fastest time ever run in the Matriarch. It used to be running 1.1 miles. It's been running a mile since, I believe, since 2003. So that was the fastest time by a good margin. Elsewhere, we had Gustavo Delgado get a Grade 1 win in the Clark with Bodie Express, which I thought was kind of cool, just because he's previously had been known best just for popping his jockey off in the Preakness, so he became kind of internet famous for that, and it's good to see him get a big win, because he does have a good amount of talent. But I think the real story in that race was kind of a disappointing effort from Code of Honor, and we touched on it last week that he's just kind of had a lost 4-year-old season. He's run okay. He hasn't been a disaster, but I think that just, if you ask Shug McGaughey what kind of 4-year-old campaign he was expecting, this was not what he had in mind. He had 1 win the entire season, so I'm not sure if that was his career finale. Maybe one of you guys know if he's going to come back. But En Voûtant was also pretty impressive in the Falls City at Churchill. She's a Ken McPeak filly who's been kind of overshadowed by Swiss Skydiver, understandably so. But she had a big blowout win, got a 100 buyer. She's an Uncle Mo, so I think she might get a little bit better as a 4-year-old. And a 5-year-old, if possible. But the horse that I wanted to talk about, and we're going to get to the Japan Cup as well, because I want to ask Kelsey her opinion about that. But the horse I wanted to mention, who I think is very interesting going forward, is Forza d'Oro, who won the Discovery on Saturday at Aqueduct. And the caveat is he got a perfect trip. He got an absolute dream trip. He just sat that inside-outside trip behind a pretty fast pace. The pace setter ran second. He's a pretty nice horse too, named Monday Morning QB. He's a Mid-Atlantic horse. But Forza d'Oro is a horse that I had an eye on last year. He had this unbelievable debut race. Kind of reminded me of when Country House broke his maiden, when he missed the break by like 12 lengths or so and still won. He didn't win that day, but if you go back and you watch Forza d'Oro's first race, he was off probably 10 lengths slow at least, and made this big sweeping wide move on the turn, and then just flattened just a tiny bit late and was a close second. He graduated next time out. He was not as impressive as I would have hoped, and then he kind of just never really went forward off of that. Bill Mott has been very, very patient with him. He gave him a long break, and then he came back and he got a 101 buyer in the Discovery on Saturday, and he really looks like he wants to run all day. He's a son of Speightstown. He's a half-brother to Silver Dust, who's a pretty good handicap horse in his own right. But he's a horse that I think has been done well by the time off that he had, and it's just a super, super interesting horse for the handicap division that really is not going to have a lot of stars, I think, at least at first. Improbable's retiring, Authentic's retiring. I mean, Tizzalaw is going to show up for a 4-year-old campaign, we think, at least, but I think it's a division that's ripe for an up-and-comer, and I think he fits the bill for sure. Maybe we see him in the Pegasus. We'll see what's next, but just that was the horse that I think I'm most interested in from the weekend. I wonder if you guys have any other thoughts or anybody else you wanted to mention.
Well, Joe, I want to pick up on the same theme, and with so many good horses having retired, I mean, really of the prominent male dirt horses of 2020, Tizzalaw is the only one that's not retiring, coming back. So there's a huge void out there and a ton of money on the table. I mean, you look at something like the Saudi Cup, I haven't heard anybody even mention that they're going to a race like that. So you look at what happened over the weekend, and I would agree with you that Forza d'Oro is certainly someone, you get the Bill Mott angle. Everybody loves his kind of horses for good reason. He's such a good trainer, very well-bred horse, seems to be peaking at the right time in his career. Code of Honor, by the way, is going to come back into Pegasus. I don't know if he's going to be retired after that or not, but they have said that he's coming back into Pegasus. And where I would imagine that Bodie Express would be as well. And, so the Pegasus is not going to be one of those races like the year when it had Gunrunner or Arrowgate or something like that. But it's kind of going to be the first chance for these horses to say, who's going to be the ones to really take a look at in 2020. And he didn't run over the weekend, but another horse I'd like to mention is Charlatan. I mean, he's up to 6 furlong workouts. I mean, obviously he's going to come back sometime soon as well. So, I think we're in the tail end of 2020. We're sort of setting the stage for what is going to be important and which horses are going to be among the older dirt males, ones that are really going to be the major players in the division. As it looks right now, it looks like a very weak group. But, 3-4 races into it, you get through the Pegasus, maybe something that happens overseas, the Oakland Handicap, those kind of things. We may be saying, hey, how about so-and-so? He really looks like the horse to get excited about in 2021. Right now, that would be Tiz the Law, but that obviously can change.
And Billy, you gave me a perfect bridge to a couple of horses I wanted to talk about that have bright futures, hopefully in 2021. They're both 2-year-olds. One was Travel Column, who is a frosted filly that won the Goldenrod at Churchill. And the reason why I was so impressed with her was she broke and got slammed, absolutely slammed by the 2 horses right next to her, had to pinch back and was in last. And basically for a young horse to give that kind of, the field, that kind of a head start is really difficult to overcome. Giroux did a great job of keeping her saving ground, kept her on the rail, and then almost got into traffic problems again at the top of the stretch, had to go from the rail to the 2-hole, the 3-path, the 4-path, until finally got outside of everybody, and then made a huge run down the lane and won, easily. So a frosted filly winning a grade 2. I think it was Frosted's first graded stake winner from his first crop. And that's a young sire that we've talked about a lot before. Brad Cox trained filly, Travel Column. And then I never do this, but I have to throw out a DJ horse that actually won, broke his maiden SWOT analysis, broke his maiden down in Louisiana by almost 10 lengths in a very easy romp. And we hopefully have pretty exciting things to talk about with SWOT analysis in the future.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Just, John, with what you said about Travel Column. She just got into trouble at various points of the races and just was able to get herself out of it. And that definitely bodes well for races in the spring. And I'm sure pointing towards the Kentucky Oaks, it's always good to know that a horse is able to be versatile and adjust to that. And I thought a good run from the runner-up Clairiere as well. I think that was just her second race. And, she had a much smoother trip, but was stepping up in company. So I thought promising from her as well. I think a few exciting fillies coming out of there that we could see down the road.
Yeah, that was a race where Simply Ravishing was like 2-5, and she ran 4th. And I don't think it's necessarily that she ran so terribly. I thought there were a couple of nice fillies in there. But another interesting side note or subplot of those Churchill Juvenile races is 2 more wins for first crop sires. Yeah, Frosted, as John mentioned, in Travel Column, who I agree is really interesting. She's an expensive horse for OXO equine. And Brad Cox, it's one of the first horses that Brad Cox has gotten from Larry Best, but that partnership seems to be growing. But the first crop sires, I think this year have been a big story because, we expected last year's star-studded freshman class to have a lot of really nice horses with Constitution, American Pharoah, and the like. I don't think that many people expected this to be such a good freshman sire class as well, but you have 9 different first crop sires who have grade stakes winners in America this year. And I don't know, I don't have a reference point based on how many grade stakes winners freshman sires had last year or the year before at this point in the year, but that seems like a lot. It seems like 9 horses to have grades, because there are only so many options, for 2-year-olds. That seems like a big number. And Nyquist and Laoban have 2. Laoban was the sire of Keep Me in Mind, who won the Kentucky Jockey Club on Saturday. But I thought that's been kind of a running story all year, is how impressive this first crop, this freshman sire class has been. And I think it's something to look at in the future and see if they can keep this up. And certainly the bar is set high from these last 2 classes for next year's first crop, and there's definitely a couple horses in next year's crop that I would be interested in as well. But I think that's definitely a cool story as well, and we saw it with Frosted and Laoban on Saturday. But before we move on from this weekend's races, I do want to mention the Japan Cup. We don't cover a ton of Euro races on this show, and I promise it's not just because Kelsey is here. I wanted to talk about it anyway because it was a big race. I stayed up late for it. I'm sure I'm not the only one. But you had basically the 3 best horses, or at least the 3 most talked about horses in Japan facing off. You had Almond Eye, who's a Hall of Fame talent, who's a 9-time at least Group 1 winner, who was just, she shows up every single time. She's kind of a little bit like the Enable of Japan. And then you had the Triple Crown winners. You had the male Triple Crown winner, Contrail, and then the filly Triple Crown winner, Hidden Tact. Is that her name? Yeah. All right. So that was a super interesting race. It was interesting the way it was run, too, because there was a horse named Kasiki who just jumped out to a 15-length lead and pretty much played the rabbit for everybody. And actually, I think only ended up beating like 6 lengths or so. So he didn't run a terrible race considering the fractions he was cutting out. But I just thought that was a great scene and a great look for racing to have those horses clash at the top of their games. But I'm wondering if Kelsey, if you had any other thoughts on that race.
Yeah, well, just like you said, having 3 Triple Crown winners, I know that was the first time that happened in Japan, to have 3 Triple Crown winners in one race, and I would be pretty confident it's the first time anywhere that's happened. But no, and like you mentioned as well, Almond Eye does deserve to be named in the same breath as Enable and these other great fillies and mares we've seen the last few years. She has 8 Group 1 wins on the JRA circuit, which is the elite circuit in Japan, and that's actually a record. No horses won more than that. And Sunday's win actually made her the richest racehorse in JRA history, with $8.3 million earned, and 9 Group 1 wins in total when you add her Dubai Turf wins. So, I mean, she's just an extraordinary mare, and she's won Group 1s over 4 different distances as well, from a mile up to a mile and a half. So, yeah, and you mentioned sort of the running of the race, and she had an excellent run there, tucked in just in the second flight of horses, with Contrail and Daring Tact just a little further back from that in midfield. And those 2 had no excuses either, with the hot pace up front. And I think the fact that this race was set up as the showdown of the 3 Triple Crown winners, and the form held true. They came first, second, third, with Almond Eye, Contrail, and Daring Tact, and those were the order of the betting favorites as well. So, it was going into it was going to be tough to see any of the 3 of those get beat, because Daring Tact and Contrail were actually both undefeated as well heading into this race. So he didn't want to see any of them get beaten, but someone obviously had to be, 2 of them had to be, but the way that it turned out was just an extraordinary race. And like you said, just a great thing for racing.
Yeah, and she's such a fan favorite, not just in Japan, but across the world. And it was her swan song. It was the final race of her career. So it was great to see her go out on top, because she really is special. And you just don't get matchups like that in any country in racing, where you have these Triple Crown winners going up against the best older horse in the country. And it was a lot of fun to watch. And I'm expecting big things from Contrail, at least next year as well, if he's going to stick around.
Absolutely, yeah. And so the next interesting thing to see will be who they send her to in the breeding shed next year. She's got Sunday Silence and King Kamehameha both up fairly close in her pedigree, but they've got a few outcross options there, and who knows, maybe we'll explore overseas as well. So it'll be very interesting to see. And
the effect of Mr. P, Mr. Prospector. Obviously, King Bombo, King Kamehameha, it's interesting to go back in these pedigrees and see the deep American influences that they have.
Yeah, exactly. Sunday Silence on the bottom for her and Mr. P on the top. So,
yeah.
Quite interesting.
We'll be right back after this message from Keeneland.
They say the harder the work, the greater the reward. And this is hard work. It's the hours put in before dawn and after dark. It's the sacrifice, the sweat, the failure, and the faith. This is our industry. This is our life's work.
This week's news is sponsored by West Point Thoroughbreds. Owning multiple great stakes-winning racehorses like Hard Not to Love, Decorated Invader is attainable with a racing partnership like West Point Thoroughbreds. Partnerships enable you to spread your ownership across several horses for less than it costs to own one horse alone. This increases your racetrack action and chances for a big horse. Learn more about why West Point Thoroughbreds is the gold standard in racing partnerships at westpointtb.com. All right, so we had some news. I mean, I don't even know if it's really news anymore that trainers get slaps on the wrist, but we had a little bit of news on the drug front yesterday or the other day. This came out in the TDN that Robertino Diodoro had been fined $5,000, but had gotten a stayed 60-day suspension from Canterbury Park for a couple of drug positives for lidocaine. And this is, this is obviously a hobby horse of ours to knock racing commissioners and stewards for being so easy on these trainers. But this is kind of a particularly ridiculous one. This is a guy who has had, at least, as far as I know, at least 3 different occasions this year where he had multiple horses disqualified for drug positives. Now, granted, they were in 3 different jurisdictions. I think one was in Oklahoma. This was in Canterbury. I forget what the third one was. Maybe Texas. I can't swear to where the third one was, but it's happened at least 3 times this year. It's happened to him in the past as well. And it stinks. It stinks to high heaven when you have these guys who are multiple offenders. And this could be anyone. I'm not just picking on Diodoro. It could be Bob Baffert. It could be anyone who's had multiple positives and they just never get seriously punished. And to have a stayed 60-day suspension, have him be on probation when he's already had all these issues this year. I mean, that's kind of defeats the purpose of probation. He's already violated the probation in the public square of opinion here. But I mean, it's embarrassing, and it's unfortunate because there is a lot of positive movement on drugs and racing. I think the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Act is going to be a big deal. I think that there is an overall thrust in the industry to get rid of drugs. We have big news this week on clenbuterol. New York is moving closer to heavily restricting clenbuterol. A bunch of states have done that. Mark Caskey's been banging that drum for a while, and he seems to be having an effect. So there is positive news in the drug sphere about really cracking down on people and figuring out why horses are moving up like this. But it's such a bad look when you have a guy who has all these positives and you can't even give him a suspension. $5,000, like what is that? What is that? A fraction of one of the purses that he won from one of these horses that were allegedly drugged up? I mean, this is a big problem PR wise for racing. And I think eventually some kind of racing commissioners and these jurisdictions have to take it upon themselves to be stewards of the game in terms of public relations and in terms of how this looks to the fan base. And it makes people sick, and rightfully so, that there just are never any meaningful punishments for these trainers. And I think we're going to get, a lot of these people are going to get bailed out by the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Act and taking the enforcement aspect out of their hands because they refuse to do the right thing. And I get it. I get the logistical concerns that these guys, they fill stalls, they fill races at your racetracks. And I get why you don't want to chase them away, especially when they have so many horses. But you have to do better than a stayed 60-day suspension for a guy who's had so many violations just in the recent past.
Yeah, Joe, I totally agree with you. And I never know what to make of these lidocaine positives and these sort of things. That's the positive he got out of Minnesota. And, when you get the kind of reports that we got on Jason Servis and Jorge Navarro, we always go back to them. They were cheating or attempting to cheat with using drugs. I don't necessarily know that a trainer getting a positive for something like lidocaine, I wouldn't necessarily say that's somebody trying to win races with performance-enhancing drugs. I don't think that's the case. But in some respects, it doesn't matter, just like you said. There's got to be a punishment for violations, and somebody has to be held accountable. And especially, it's safe to say this guy's controversial. There's a lot of whispers about him, as there are with all these guys that win 25, 26% type of things. So they come out with there were extenuating circumstances, but then didn't say what the extenuating circumstances were. So add on to the fact they didn't give him a suspension, plus they weren't necessarily transparent about why they weren't giving him the suspension. It's not good. So, did he deserve a slap on the wrist, which is what he got? No. The guy violated a rule. As you said, this isn't the first time. Give him the suspension and let's move on here. But, to just say, oh, never mind, how do they come up with that? I don't even begin to understand something like that.
And Bill, you stole on my thunder. We're on the same page. It's quite frankly, it's a joke. And people wonder why we don't talk about certain racing jurisdictions. Why are we only talking about East Coast and West Coast races? Why only talking about graded stake races? Why aren't we talking about, the meat and potatoes of the industry, which is the claiming ranks and horses that have to run every 2 weeks and some of these smaller racetracks? It's because of stuff like this. It's because why should we promote Minnesota racing, Canterbury Downs, when they have a trainer that's there that dominates the standings, dominates the entries, to the point where he violated rules that all the other trainers are abiding by, and yet he gets a slap on the wrist. So they come out and they say, we're going to give you a suspended sentence, which doesn't mean anything, and it is based on, and I quote, mitigating factors. Well, what are those mitigating factors? Are they that, he was, contrite and apologized for doing it? Did his lawyer come up with some defense that is, irrefutable, so therefore he shouldn't get a fine or a suspension? Or is it just that, hey, he fills races for us, and whenever we need a race to go, he's a guy that's going to put a horse in, and, he's a leading trainer here, so we don't want to rock the boat, and that's the, mitigating factors. Well, like Bill said, be transparent. At least say that's what it is. If that's the reason why. And if it's not, tell us the reason why, so that way we have a better understanding as the racing public, so we know what is going on there. If it's a legitimate reason, then tell us. And if it is a legitimate reason, I will come back on the air and apologize for this rant. But if it's not, then all you're doing is making yourself look bad, Minnesota racing.
Yeah, John. Well, exactly like you said, mitigating factors could be a wide range of things. It could be something that is understandable. It could be something, like you said, that he fills stalls, and just not knowing, not being given an explanation is offensive to the racing public, to the bettors. And then I think as Terry Finley alluded to last week on the show, the people finishing behind him that are, losing value in their animals, yeah, so it's just, and like Joe spoke about too, these jurisdictions just no one seems to be willing to step up and properly police this. So it might take something like the Horse Racing Integrity Act to actually force change. And, and one of the complicated factors, of course, as we all know, and we've discussed at length, is just the way that racing is regulated across, I believe it's 38 different jurisdictions across the country. So that makes things complicated as well. But why can't one jurisdiction step up, do the right thing? Some of them can band together, others can follow. It's just, like you said, it's just a horrible look, and someone has to start doing the right thing.
Yeah, and I think that fragmented system that we have gives a lot of these tracks cover to say, like, oh, well, those drug positives weren't in our jurisdiction, so they're not, like, he didn't violate the rules here, so now we're going to put him on probation here. And it's just, when a guy has 100,000 horses and runs at a million different tracks, like, it doesn't matter where the drug positives came. If he's got these on his record in the recent past, to me, he's already violated his probation if his horses fail a bunch of other tests. And I think it goes back to what I said about, like, these, like, people in racing, I think, have to take it upon themselves to be stewards of the game in terms of how it looks to its customer base. Forgetting even the PETA stuff and, like, trying to impress the people who aren't, like, big racing fans, who are more casual observers. Like, they're not going to care about a Minnesota drug overage, but it's the #1 story on the TDN website right now, because people in this business do care, and rightfully so, that justice isn't being done for people who get popped multiple times for multiple drug violations in different states. And, obviously there's the animal welfare aspect of it too. Like, these horses, whether or not lidocaine is a performance enhancer, like, I don't want to get into all that, but when you have guys who are consistently getting popped for drug overages, and then these horses get claimed, and then they go somewhere else and they go to some smaller track and run for a smaller tag and just run up the track, and these horses get chewed up and lost in the system. And that is a big problem too. And that's something that Sal Sinatra talked about when we had him on the show. And I think Sal's a good example of one of the guys who gets it, who understands that when being in charge of the Maryland Jockey Club drug enforcement policies, he is a steward of the game and how it is presented to the entire country, and to a lesser extent to the world. Like, he understands that if something bad happens in Maryland, and I give the guy a stayed suspension and, like, a 1 cent fine, he understands that that's going to look bad for racing all across the board, not just in Maryland. It does not just affect him and his jurisdiction. This is something where racing needs, where racing needs a unified voice, where people understand that they are representing the entire sport when they make these rulings, and they're not just representing themselves and their jurisdiction and their small tracks. Like, this is something that is an ongoing problem for the sport. And when you don't have the courage to step up and actually demand some actual punishment from people who violate your rules, you're going to look like a pushover and a patsy. And that's kind of the system we've had in racing for a long time, where the trainers call the shots, especially at these smaller tracks, and they're too afraid to punish them. And like, hopefully this is going to change, with the new bill that's going to pass. And I think, racing jurisdictions in America have proven over decades that they have no willingness to, or competency even, to actually punish cheaters. And thankfully, it seems like it's going to be taken out of their hands, because that's the only remedy, is to take it out of the hands of the people who run racing right now, because they will not do the right things by and large. And since we have Kelsey here, I wanted to ask her about this, because I feel like there's a pretty big contrast between the way that drugs are handled in Europe and in America. And I think a lot of it has to do with there being a unified front, like the BHA, which is something we don't have anything even resembling in America. So I wonder about the PR aspect as well, Kelsey. How do you think they handle it better and differently than we do in America?
Yeah, well, the BHA, as you mentioned, like, integrity is always something that you hear a lot about from them, and they're doing, different integrity reviews and all that sort of thing. And they take the image of their sport and their industry incredibly seriously. And of course, it's simplified extensively by the fact that there is one jurisdiction, and that is the whole country, and there is one governing body. So that simplifies things greatly, but they hold their integrity very high, and they actually enforce penalties. When you don't hear about someone, like Diodoro incurring, penalty after penalty, offense after offense. You just don't hear about stuff like that, because I think that the trainers know that they will actually be punished and could be banned, could receive lengthy bans, could lose their licenses.
Kelsey, wasn't this recently where Aidan O'Brien actually scratched a couple of his grade 1 entries because he was concerned that maybe they might test positive?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Over like an accident, right?
Pardon me?
Over like an accidental situation. It wasn't like that I'm not inferring that he was drugging horses. It was just that he knew there might be a problem and scratched them.
Yeah, there was a feed contamination issue over in Europe, and that actually affected a few different stables, and Aidan O'Brien was one of them. He got talked about the most because he had to scratch his 4 runners from the Arc de Triomphe. But yeah, it was well known that was a feed contamination issue, but he said, that, and the other trainers that scratched their horses as well, said that that's just not something that they can risk. Test-wise, and also, they were looking out for the integrity of the sport. And there again, you see figures such as that will say, okay, there's a chance that it's out of this horse's system, but we're not going to take that chance because, it's in the best interest of the industry. And to have his 4 horses scratch from the Arc, that is a massive financial hit. So.
Yeah, it's a shock to the system to think about guys, especially as big as Aidan O'Brien, preemptively scratching horses. So they don't want to test positive, when in America you have guys who test positive seemingly all the time, who aren't even afraid of the afterward, the penalties, which is, oh man, we got a long way to go, but hopefully this bill can do a lot, because we still need a lot of work. But yeah, that's the integrity part is the main thing, is that I think they feel like they all have to watch out for the way the sport is interpreted by the public and by the betting public. And in America, it's just, we don't seem like the people in charge, by and large, have that concern. Joining a West Point Thoroughbreds partnership can vault you into the world of instant camaraderie among people surrounding high-class horses and stakes action for a fraction of the cost of trying to do it on your own. Learn more at westpointtb.com. We'll be right back after this message from West Point Thoroughbreds. So our Green Group guest of the week this week is the Green Group himself, the founder and chairman of the Green Group, one of our lovely sponsors, Len Green. Thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure, sir.
All right, so it's great to have you. We're going to ask a little bit about the business, a little bit about racing, which I think is your preferred business. But I'll start with this. You do a great column in the TDN called Proven Strategies, and it's basically about how horse owners can take advantage of changes in the tax law to make themselves more profitable in the business. So we do have an outgoing administration and an incoming administration. Do you have just a couple of bullet points about what owners should be looking for, what changes owners should be looking forward to in the Biden administration?
Okay, good question, Joe. And again, we come at it a little differently than other accounting firms. Other accounting firms would give you an answer. They would read, okay, some column or something of what the law is and their interpretation of the law. For us, because we handle over 750 clients in the horse business, we really narrow it down to how does it affect us in the horse business, not generalization, but actually coming down to it kind of thing. And it's not disfavorable in any way, shape, or form. You'd say, well, capital gain rates are going to change. They're going to go up. But very few of the people in the horse business actually get to use capital gains, because when they buy a fixed asset like a horse, et cetera, they usually depreciate it down. So when they sell it, it's going to be ordinary income. So it's not going to be capital gains for them. And you know, can you put more money into a pension plan? Yeah, you can, but how many of our clients actually put a lot of money into the pension plan? They don't. They put it into horses. So you still, as of now, okay, that it is as favorable to own horses as it's ever been, because you don't have to worry about the 3-year depreciation, the 7-year depreciation. You can write it off immediately. In fact, you can buy a horse in Tattersville today, okay, and you can write the whole thing off, okay, even if you don't pay for it until, okay, January. So it's really, I don't see anything different that Biden has proposed, okay, that's going to hurt the horse industry. And then number two, for being in this business such a long time, Joe, the fact that Biden says, here's what I want to do, he's got about a less than a 50-50 chance of it actually being accepted over the years. When you look to see what people have proposed versus what's actually happened, it doesn't work that way. So again, it's been very, very favorable from a tax point of view to be in the horse business. Next step is how do you get smart in the horse business and don't just do it the same way you've always been doing it, because if you're losing money, then what makes you think you're going to make money now?
Hey, Len, it's Bill Finley, and thanks for joining us. And diving into sort of the minutia of some of the things you're saying, and for a layman like me, it's understandably hard to understand. But I got an advanced copy of the story that's going to be in Thursday's Thoroughbred Daily News, and you were just talking about depreciation, and this is quoting verbatim from your story. Certain thoroughbreds can still be depreciated as 3-year property. Could you explain that further?
Well, the normal rules are that if you buy a racehorse, you can depreciate it over a 3-year period of time. And for people who are not, familiar with the horse industry, other accountants and things, when they see a purchase, they look on the table, it says what kind of asset, racehorse, they say, okay, 3-year life. But in reality, okay, so you can certainly can still do that. And Bill, the strange thing is, a lot of accountants worry about, let's have a profit in 2 out of, they think 5, but it's actually a special rule for horses, 2 out of 7 years. So a lot of them depreciate it very slowly over a 3-year period or broodmares over 7 years. So they try to show a profit, in 2 of those years. That they don't realize that profit 2 out of 7 years is only one of 9 tests to show that you're actively involved. So we, say let's maximize our tax deductions and let's write it off in 1 year, even if you buy it as of December 31st. So normal rules, 3-year write-off for racehorses, normal rules, 7-year write-off for broodmares. But why do that when you're allowed to write them off in 1 year?
Before John goes, I want a follow-up question on that. It's interesting something you said. about you need to show a profit 2 out of 7 years. Well, I think 99% of the owners out there would say, I don't do that. I lose money every year, or maybe 1 in 10 years I earn money. So if you're literally not making money 2 out of 7 years, why is it in your best interest to claim you're making money 2 out of 7 years?
It isn't, because there's 9 tests to show that you're actively involved in the horse business, and only one of them, Bill, is that profitability. The other is how you run it. Are you running it in a business-like manner? Are you setting up an LLC? Do you have a separate charge account, okay, for your operations? Do you have a separate checking account for your operations? Do you spend the time listening in on a podcast like this so you can learn something about the business? Okay, that's all. And if you run it in that same kind of business-like manner that you probably made some money so you can afford to buy horses with, that's really the reason why you're actively involved in it versus passive. And then the funny part was, okay, about a month ago, okay, somebody sent me their returns and they said, we've been examined 3 years in a row. We've only been in business 3 years in a row. We can't understand why we're not losing that much money, because their accountant put occupation, hobby. You're sure to be examined that way. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, fine.
So when you've obviously been in the business for 30 years, you've won, grade 1 races, you've had champions, all the way down to winning, claiming titles and owners titles at various racetracks. Obviously, you've been very successful in this business. What would you recommend to our audience members who are, looking to get into the business, looking to buy their first horse? What should they do to set up their business in advance so that way they can, claim that they are actively involved?
Yeah, again, John, I would probably break it down into its component parts. One, you want to run it in a business-like manner. When you just write checks out of your own regular checking account, which has personal deductions on it, et cetera, when you don't set up your own LLC, so you set up, so it looks like and it sounds like a business, because you're running it as a business. Not only are you getting the protection of the LLC as far as liability, but it again gives you the appearance that you're running it as a business. So when we started way back when, okay, we weren't running it in a business-like manner. Hey, a friend said, would you like to buy part of a horse? It might be fun, okay? And a lot of people get into the business because a friend says, would you like to join me on this thing? Well, that's not what I call a business-like manner. You really have to, over the years, learn about, number one, setting it up so it looks and sounds and smells like a business and actually is being run in a business-like manner. 2, you got to have some strategy, okay? And 3, you got to keep on changing that strategy every single couple of years if it's not working. You look at it and say, hey, what did I do? Who am I using? Who is my trainer? Who's my advisor? Okay. What strategy am I using for breeding? Okay. Do I know anything about the business? Do I know anything about the people who are representing me, who are buying horses for me or selling horses for me? Or do I visit the farm to find out what's going on? Or do I just say to the farm, tell me when my horse is ready? Well, it'll be ready about a year from now because there's a certain amount of money that they make, okay, for keeping. So these are all things. And if you listen in on these podcasts, okay, over the period of time, the kind of people that you have here, the kind of questions that you're asking them, okay, those are good thinking things. You a step back and say, hey, we asked that question of them, but what are we doing? Okay, what are we doing differently? Okay, and I remember a few years ago, John, okay, when we were fortunate enough to meet Peter Brandt, okay, and he was talking about his key to success was buying horses overseas. And I turned to John and I said, wait a second, we have never bought a horse overseas. Are we missing out on that marketplace, okay, because they're turf horses, et cetera, kind of, that could add value to what we're doing here, kind of thing. And then who are we using to training our horses? Okay, and who are we using for layups? And who we're using for representatives to look at the horses at the sale because you can't see everything. Well, I think if you start looking at these things in a business-like manner and say, okay, what are my chances of being successful? It's a lot. You increase your chances. I think if you as a stockbroker, okay, and you say to me, pick out this one stock or that one stock, and I would say, well, how about a mutual fund? How about an opportunity to have a mixture? Okay, so you look at our stable, and I'm not saying our stable is the ideal, but we have weanlings, broodmares, yearlings, 2-year-olds, things that we've bred ourselves, things that we've bought as weanlings, yearlings, 2-year-olds, or experienced horses. And we cover the whole gamut now of opportunities. And then the easiest thing, John, is just simply have a horse like Jaywalk, okay, that turns around and wins the Eclipse Award, and then turn around and you convince me to sell her as a broodmare. Well, it's easy.
I'm thinking back over 2020, which was obviously a very different year for businesses as well as their employees. And I'm thinking about things like a lot of people have been working from home, and a lot of offices have been closed, that sort of thing. I wonder if there's sort of anything in the taxes that people can look at, like write-offs they might be able to get from working from home, if there's anything businesses can look at to claim anything back.
Kelsey, it's a great question. Okay, we ought to have you on more often and let these other guys scram out of here, kind of thing. Kelsey, up to a couple of years ago, okay, the IRS said, wait a second, none of this home office stuff, okay? If it's for your convenience and you have another office somewhere else, you can't take any home office expenses. And then a year ago, okay, they said, you know what, we changed our mind. In fact, we'll make it real easy for you. We'll say, if you can figure out the square footage of a room that you use exclusively for the horse business, okay, we'll give you a simple way to compute a tax deduction, okay? That's the simple one. Now that they've approved home offices, especially with the COVID, okay, now you got to be creative. You got to say, okay, let's look at the tax law that says I can either take square footage of my house, or I can take number of rooms in my house, excluding bathrooms, etc. Well, it may turn out that, let's say, for easy computation, 1/8, you're using one room out of 8 usable rooms, okay, for the horse operation. Okay, Len, so what? Well, here's what you can deduct. You add up heat, light, power, insurance, taxes, real estate taxes, okay, insurance, repairs and maintenance. Put that all together, and then you can multiply that times 1/8. That's a tax deduction. Take your house, okay, what did your house cost with improvements? 1/8 times whatever the depreciation rate is, okay? Now you're suddenly building up a very nice tax deduction kind of thing. What do you have in that room that you've never deducted before? Do you have a computer? Do you have a chair? Do you have a desk? Okay. If you've never depreciated them before, you can depreciate them now because you put them into use now. So Kelsey, you can see you can get a very, very nice tax deduction for that. And then you look and expand it a little bit more and say, okay, I certainly need a computer to listen to this. I certainly need, okay, to look at cable, okay, if I'm watching my horses. And now you start expanding what is tax deductible that you never thought was deductible before, kind of thing. Now, how do we know that? Well, because we're in the business, okay, and therefore we look at every deduction that you can take, okay, in the horse business because we're actively involved in the horse business. The normal accountant, as good as they are, they can't be experts in this business if they don't own horses because all they're doing is looking at the law. They're not experiencing it. And we're experiencing all the time. And there are new things that come up all the time as say, wait a second, how come we didn't think of that before? Well, because we never had that before, okay, and now we do. Yeah.
Speaking of all your experience in the game, I wanted to shift gears and ask about your upbringing in horse racing, as it were. John's told us about some of his best memories growing up, being a railbird at Monmouth and such. But I wanted to know how you, as we say, caught the bug and got into racing for life.
Bad business. I was told, okay, don't get into the horse business. And if you get into the horse business and you're an accountant, don't let anybody know about it because they're going to think you're shifty or you bet too much, et cetera, kind of thing. So as close as we lived to Monmouth Park, okay, I never went to Monmouth Park and I never bet on any horse racing, okay. And then one summer, okay, I had played tennis in college, okay, and we had a client down in Jacksonville, okay, Florida, who was a plastic surgeon, okay, specializing in only a couple of areas, okay. He had Dolly Parton as a client, et cetera, kind of thing, okay. And he wanted to win a tennis tournament down in his private club. So he invited me down there, okay. So I went down, okay, and he said, yeah, for first lend, the first set, play left-handed. So I did, okay, and we won that one, and then we started moving up. There were 4 rounds, and in the second round we won easily, but something seemed to hit the back of my ankle, and I said to him, "This seems strange." He says, "I'm a doctor." He says, "Let's go over to the pool." I took off my sneaker, put my foot in the pool. Okay, it was cold. He then wrapped it up. We finished the 3rd round. Okay, won again. And I said to him, "I'm having a little trouble walking." He said, "Well, you just serve, okay, or just stand at the net and I'll take care of everything else." Well, that night I went to the hospital because I had popped Achilles. Came home, and here I am, home with all the apparatuses to walk on, okay, and I'm going simply crazy. And my next door neighbor said, "Why don't you come down to Monmouth Park? Okay, I have a horse running." Okay, I went down to Monmouth Park. Okay, his horse won on crutches. I got into the winner's circle. Okay, and then on the way home, I said, "Wait a second, this guy had just started a company called Manhattan Bagels, okay, which turned out to be very successful, and then tanked. Okay, and I said, you know what? I think I'm smarter than he is, and if he could get in the horse business and he can win, what am I doing?" Okay, so to make the story a little shorter and to a point, Joe, okay, I started thinking, you know what? If I'm successful in some other business, I can easily be successful in this business. Okay, that's if I looked out over our 700 clients, okay, well, each of them, if they have one fault, they probably is, if I'm successful in one business, I really don't need advice. I can be successful in this horse business, okay? And that's why most of them lose money, and why I was losing money also. And Shark Tank's a great example of it, because we've had people who have been on Shark Tank, and to actually get there is very difficult to start with. And then your presentation, okay, is very, because you got to have very thick skin, because you got to realize that they're not really trying to talk about your business. This is show business, okay? Yeah. So you got to have that kind of thing going with you. And then even when they say they're going to invest with you, half the time they don't invest because they start investigating what you're saying. So it really sells well. It's the same as Apprentice sold very, very well.
That's why we make fun of John on this show, just because it's good for the show.
It's good for the show. It's good for the show.
But you realize that John also can take a tax deduction for his haircuts and other things, okay, kind of thing. Joe, you could do it for your beard kind of thing.
Wow. How about this plant behind me that they make fun of me for?
They did make fun of, yeah, exactly.
And Len, you bring back some memories. You talk about the early days at Monmouth Park, and back in the 70s or 80s or whatever, I was somebody running around Monmouth Park myself as a young kid and everything. And I remember DJ Stables well. You'd win $1 million, $5,000 claiming races with Walter Reese as your trainer. So when, where, how, and why did you go from that sort of operation to one now that is playing at the much higher level of the game?
Yeah, what happened, that's a great question. What happens is, okay, you get used to a particular pattern, okay, of doing business, okay? And it really takes a shock sometime to get you out of your comfort zone. So our comfort zone was winning races. I mean, it was great. You go down there, okay, and you were winning 30% of the time. You were losing the horse, okay, because if the horse won at 25, Walter would bring it down to 20, okay. And you know what? It would win at 20, but by that point, somebody would actually take it from you, and you'd lose the horse. Now, that horse may have cost you originally 100, but Walter's theory was you run it where it belongs, which is correct, okay? Except it's a great pattern to lose money with. So again, at a certain point in time, we said, hey, let's get out of this claiming game, because the claiming game is probably one of the most difficult games to win at. Because at that time, and even somewhat today, okay, there are tricks to the trade for the claiming horses, so that you can hide certain things that are wrong. You can't examine the horse, okay, like you can at a sale, okay. So it's very, very difficult sometimes to be able to claim a horse properly that gives you some upside, okay. I don't know if John's told you the story about the horse, okay, that he claimed down in Atlantic City, the last day of Atlantic City. Now, when you figure it's the last day of Atlantic City, it really was not the last day of the meet. It was the last day that Atlantic City was going to be in existence, okay? And he saw a horse called Rum that was going to run that night. So we went down there, and it wasn't the normal kind of thing because everything had been torn down, okay? So John had actually run all the way down to the start of where the barn area was, so he could at least look at the horse, okay, and then give some kind of signal to drop the claim thing, okay. So our trainer went down to the end and started waving, okay, and said to John, what does that mean? He said, I'm not sure. I think waving means drop the slip. So we dropped the slip, okay, but there wasn't any place to drop the slip because there wasn't a claim box, okay. Anyway, make a long story short, they gave him a little box that keep dropping in. We claimed the horse. The horse turned out to be a stake horse, okay? But that's the kind of thing you got to do to try to get a competitive advantage in this game. Or you go to a sale today, okay, and you see that here's a horse out of a sire you never heard of before called Cross Traffic, okay, or some horse that's Iroquois or something like that kind of thing. No-name sires. Do you take a chance on a no-name sire, or do you just want to buy a horse, okay, from a name sire or one that has a pedigree page, okay? And I think there's a real advantage sometime of taking a chance on it. And you go one step further. What else are you doing new? Well, we never looked at the RNAs before. RNA, okay, it is a horse that didn't sell the first time around. Well, now we go and look at the RNAs and say, hey, is there a chance that that might be a good horse? And let's negotiate a little bit and see, okay, does that person have to sell the horse because he doesn't race? So what I'm saying is, if you actually treat this as a real business and look for competitive advantages, and I don't think you can have a competitive advantage if you just stay with claiming horses. Last part of the story, okay? I get a book by Ken McLean that says How to Breed a Champion. Ken was the manager of a horse called Stormcat over at Overbrook. So I really admired what he was doing because he went back 4 or 5 generations to prove that if a horse genetically would work or not. So I read in his book, he said, if you can get speed in the dam and then breed to a stout, okay, champion horse, you really have an opportunity to come up with a good horse. So for the next 2 months, I claimed every horse, every filly that did 10 seconds plus or minus, okay, at Monmouth Park. I claimed 60 horses. I then took the pedigrees and sent them to Ken McLean. And I said, Ken, I read your book, and these fit the pattern that you talk about as far as mares, and I think they'd be perfect for Stormcat, who was then standing for $150,000. My wife says, you were a lunatic. And I said, that's how I've been successful in life. I get a call from Ken McLean, would you like to come down to Kentucky and talk about breeding to Stormcat? Bill, at that point in time, I said, I'm giving up my regular job because I really have this horse business. I know what I'm doing. So we flew down to Kentucky, and I laid out the 60 pedigrees. And Ken McLean walked in. I don't know if you have ever heard of Ken McLean, but he's from Australia, and he has very few words, okay? He walked in, and he said, I like this one, and I like that one, and I will give you a breeding, okay, and we'll split the operation, okay? When we sell it, we'll go 50-50. Well, one of them turned out to be November Snow, who was a champion in the United States. One turned out to be Senator Pointee, who was a champion in Canada. And then he stood up, and I said, where are you going? He said, I'm leaving. I said, well, we got 58 more pedigrees to go over. He says, where are they? I said, they're up in New Jersey and New York. He says, no, where are they? I said, they're on farms. Ken, what do you? He says, the farms have paddocks? Yes, sir. Do they have gates? Yes, sir. Well, open the gates. The other 58 were worthless. There's no easy way in this.
That sums up the horse business pretty well, I would say.
All right. So Len, you've entered the speed round of the Green Group Guests of the Week. So in 30 seconds or less, can you answer a couple of questions for us? As far as people that you work with, clients of yours in the industry, are there one or two or three that you feel like you've learned something from over the years?
John, I really think I've learned something from everybody, but we're fortunate now because we really know the horse taxation business. And I'm going to say better than anybody else, even though there are other accounting firms that will claim they really know the business. None of them own, okay, 200 or 300 horses the way we do. You know, the only way you learn it is actually to be in it, okay. But I think, John, when you look at the number of consigners, the top consigners in the business, you know, we do the top consigners. You look at the trainers in the business, we do the top trainers in the business, okay? So that vets, we do the top vets in the business. And I keep on asking them questions all the time about our operation and have you seen something and do you do something? And owners, we do the same thing. I mentioned Peter Brandt before only because of the fact that he introduced us to the idea of buying overseas kind of thing. But certainly some of the top trainers like, you know, Chad Brown and Todd Pletcher, et cetera, and Mark Cassick, they certainly have a different way of training, okay, horses than people who haven't had that. So if you do want to have a really top horse, okay, and you happen to have a top horse, okay, they've been there before. They know how to push it and bring it up and where to race it, et cetera, kind of thing. So I think those are all advantages when you have the top consigners in the business and you can go to them and say, hey, I looked at your consignment and I really like the pedigrees of these horses. And they'll say to you, great pedigree. But there are some other horses that are consignment you might want to look at. That's a great way of saying, move on. So I think there's a real advantage to it. Do you still have to take calculated risk? You certainly do, okay? Do you want to move into, you know, buying horses who have already raced and try to then take them and put them on the Derby trail? That's another new way of doing it. And we've tried that now for the first time this year. You got to keep on changing your strategy so that you keep on putting yourself in a position that you can get lucky. And then the most important lesson that I'm now starting to learn is my manager says to me, once a horse is claimed off of you, take it off of your list and don't look at it anymore. That's a little tough because I remember many times, walking around and spending hours picking out the horses and bidding on the horses, and you almost get attached to them. Can't do that. If you want to make money, you can't get attached to them. You've got to be able to say, hey, if they can't do it, I don't care if you spent them. We did a little survey on horses that were bought for $750,000 and up. Think about it sometime. You would think that at that point in time, when you spend that much money, your chances of success are that much greater. And the answer is they ain't.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the great things about racing is the meritocracy. Either they can run or they can't. Doesn't matter how much they cost. Yeah,
Joe, but you look sometimes on what happens when you spend that kind of money. Will they put a horse in a race that it has a chance on it? And many times that means, will you put it into a claiming race?
Yeah.
And there's something about people's ego sometimes where they just...
Definitely. Yeah. Even a high-priced maiden claimer, like I see a lot of horses that should be in for 75 or whatever track's card, and they just won't do it.
So, Len, one thing I was wondering is, do you find an advantage in your stable in buying fillies over colts or vice versa?
Very good question, Kelsey. And if you put this in your mind, if you want to be successful in any business, okay, and mind you, okay, besides horse racing, okay, we own and operate about 20 different companies. And I teach, at a place called Babson College, which is just entrepreneurship, period. So I get the opportunity to analyze all the successful businesses in the world. If you want to be successful, you have to do things differently than everybody else. So, Len, what does everybody else do? They want to get into the Derby or the Preakness or the Belmont, okay? And maybe there's 60 chances out of the 3,000 or so horses that are born every year. Why would you want that as your goal? Instead of that, how about buying fillies? Because there are filly equivalent races to that, but you have the opportunity that if they get black type, then you have a residual chance to make money down the road because each time you breed to that black type, okay, filly or mare, now you have a chance to get into the top places in sales, which gives you the chance to sell and make profit. So the answer is buy good fillies and marry one of them.
I think try for more doubles and fewer home runs, I think is the way to go. To use a baseball analogy.
Joe, not only that, but once you get that on first base or second base, try to say, how am I going to move that up to third base and come home? And let's take the filly for a second. Let's say it gets black type. Well, then what do you do with that? You try to breed it to something that will then be sellable. Maybe it's a new hot sire for a couple of years. Maybe, okay, forget about the work crosses and all that kind of stuff. Figure out, hey, if I breed this, okay, can I sell it and make a profit? Okay, because a certain number of the horses that you breed probably should be for sale and certain ones, okay, for racing. Diversify, do things differently than other people. And then again, plug for the accounting firm for a minute. Maximize your tax deductions. Don't waste your tax deductions by not knowing which ones are deductible, how to deduct it, what are the things, how to be active. Those are very, very important things because if the government will pay for 30 or 40% of your expenses, well, then you got a really good chance, okay, of making some money.
For sure. And I plug it every week, but if you want to learn more about how Len and the Green Group can help you can go to greenco.com. Len, thank you so much for joining us and for all the expertise. It was great to talk to you, and we appreciate all the support.
Well, thank you for having me on the show.
The Green Group Guest of the Week is sponsored by the Green Group, an accounting, tax consulting, and advisory firm specializing in the thoroughbred industry. I feel like we all just got a 1-hour tax consultation from the great Len Green. We'll be right back after this message from the Green Group.
The Green Group is widely recognized as the top-rated tax and accounting firm specializing in the horse business. Why do the top owners, breeders, pinhookers, and trainers trust the Green Group as their tax advisors? The difference is experience. Firm founder Len Green has over 4 decades of experience owning, breeding, and racing horses. First-hand knowledge gives Green Group clients proven tax and money-saving strategies. Visit the Green Group at www.greenco.com. The Green Group, proven strategies to save you taxes.
So before we go, I just wanted to set the table a little bit for this weekend's racing. We do have the Claiming Crown at Gulfstream. I know that's what everybody's looking forward to. But with the main action is going to be at Aqueduct on Saturday. It's the big final card of the year in New York. We have the Demoiselle and the Remsen Grade 2s for 2-year-olds going 1 1/8 miles. And then we also have the Go for Wand, which is a Grade 3 for older fillies going 1 mile. But the main course is the Cigar Mile, which is a Grade 1. Only worth $250,000 this year, obviously, because of the purse cuts due to COVID. But still a Grade 1, one of the last Grade 1 opportunities of the year. It's just this and the Malibu that are left before we turn the calendar to 2021. And 2 really interesting horses. I think it's mostly a field of kind of hard-knocking Grade 3, Grade 2 types. But there are 2 horses that I think are really interesting. One is Performer for Shug McGaughey. I think he might be the one to take Code of Honor's place in that coveted stall in the barn of Shug. I think he's an up and coming, really nice miler 7 furlong type. He had a great win at Belmont a month or 2 ago, where he just never asked for anything at any point. He's a super flashy, cool horse, can go to the lead, can close from off the pace. So I think he's definitely going to take some beating. But there is another interesting horse in the race as well, who was King Guillermo. And there was a great feature this week in the TDN. In the TDN Look, there was a preview in the TDN, and then the TDN Look, we had the video with Victor Martinez, the owner of King Guillermo. Bill did a great job on the story, and Patty and the crew did a great job on the video. It's obviously a really interesting horse. He had that long break before the Derby and then had a scratch from the Derby, so we haven't seen him since the spring. I'm sure they're raring to go to get him to run on Saturday in the Cigar Mile. But I think those are the 2 main horses that you're really looking at in terms of future prospects, in terms of big 4-year-old seasons. And 5-year-old seasons. So Performer and King Guillermo for me. I'm not going out on a limb there, but definitely check out that Look feature on Victor Martinez. Obviously, Boston Red Sox, great, Cleveland Indians. Just starting to get into racing with Victoria's Ranch, and hopefully we see a bigger footprint from him in the future, especially with the success of King Guillermo. The New York Racetrack Chaplaincy's Christmas Drive is underway. It's a huge boon to the backstretch communities of Belmont, Aqueduct, and Saratoga. The Racetrack Chaplaincy does great work all across the country, really just providing for the people who are the backbone of the horse racing industry here. And Christmas Drive is a great way to help out, learn why you could and should consider sponsoring a family this Christmas.
In my time around the backstretch, it's been apparent to me that the backstretch chaplaincy is really part of the backbone of the racetrack. And what they do for people, the care, there are no bounds, no limits to what they will do for the people of the backstretch in terms of improving their quality of life. And I fully intend to support their Christmas charity and their pledge and to support a family.
All right, so that's going to do it for this week's edition of the TDN Writers Room presented by Keeneland. Remember, the Keeneland Digital sale is December 15th, and entries are open until this Friday, December 4th. You can learn more at KeenelandDigital.com. I want to thank Bill Finley, John Green, Kelsey Riley, our producer, Patty Wolf, our editors, Danny Seiper and Aaliyah LaRocca, and our Green Group guest of the week, Len Green. Thanks so much for watching. Wear a mask. We'll see you next week.